Hey guys, welcome to our channel. My name is Ryan.
And my name is Travis, and welcome to our wisdom adventure.
We don't have everything figured out, but we're trying to. So we want to invite you on this journey where we learn about different ideas and gain knowledge and understanding, and we want you to be a part of it and learn with us. So thanks for joining. So Trav, last time we talked about Daniel Pink's book a little bit. We talked about the understanding of timing and the importance of when. So reading through a little bit farther and getting more towards the middle of the book, what is the next, couple chapters that we're going to be discussing today?
In part 2 of his book, he starts to go into our beginnings, our endings, and in between in our life. Mm-hmm. And he starts to look at how these different points that we reach, how they have effect on a lot of what we do and a lot of what we think.
So going more into that, what does he talk about more specifically into the first chapter? What were some points that were highlighted to you and got your attention?
Mm-hmm. One of the big ones that I thought was a great kind of topic issue with school is start times for school. We talked about the beginning, when people are rising, when people are actually getting their energy and motivation levels, and in younger people, that's typically a lot later. In chapter 1, he talks about how young people, that's when they're going through the biggest changes in their chronobiology, but yet the way that we've structured school hasn't really been approaching to set them up for success. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a lot of studies and people calling for later times for school to actually start. One study examined 3 years of data from 9,000 students from 8 high schools in Minnesota, Colorado, and Wyoming, and they changed their schedules to begin school after 8:35 a.m. Mm. The book talks about most schools are starting on average around, I believe, 8:03 a.m.
Okay.
Or earlier. And what they found was attendance rose, tardiness declined, students earned higher grades in core subjects of math, English, science, and social studies.
Wow.
Improved their performance on state and national standardized tests. At one school, the number of car crashes for teen drivers fell by 70% after a push at start time, from 7:35 a.m. to 8:55 a.m.
That's cool. So they weren't starting until 8:55?
That was one school that had found that. Most of them had changed to 8:35.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Just one of those stats is enough to say, hey, let's look at this to make a change. And just like, previously we've discussed in the book too, how making these changes are not easy because they're on such a large scale. Yep. Especially, at least for me, I don't understand how the entire system works. And, if you make a change, you can't just make a change maybe at one school by this big of a margin without affecting all the schools and getting things passed and getting things voted on. But even then, changes happen in systems by someone stepping up and bringing something to attention that's valid with the right research and saying, hey, maybe this is at least worth a shot because there'll be 70% less car accidents. Even if we got if we put that in half, 35%, that's a huge difference. But the tardiness and people doing better on their core subjects and probably just enjoy a little bit more going to school, not feeling like you're rushing every single day.
Yeah.
And it might be easier for parents too, of thinking, okay, I don't have to I want to bring them as late as I possibly can so I don't have to wait for 20 minutes before I then have to drive to work because I don't have enough time to go home. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of I can see how that's benefiting, but that's super interesting.
Yeah. The American Academy of Pediatrics issued a policy statement that schools should not begin no earlier than 8:30 a.m. The CDC even saying delaying school start times has a great potential population impact. Another study found that 30,000 students across 7 states after 2 years of implementing a later start time, graduation rates increased by more than 11%.
Wow.
There's a lot of things that are seeming pretty obvious when you read these, and there are a lot of roadblocks that are in place, but then you start asking the question, what's the priority?
Yeah.
Is the children's safety, learning, is that really the priority? And you start to feel like it's not, that there's a lot of other things that are forcing people's hands to do this. Through all of this study, the question asks, and what we're thinking is, why is there resistance? And a lot of it is adults' ability and capacity to actually provide this, whether their work schedules allow it. Once again, it's kind of a reflection of how work is being structured.
Yeah.
And he brings up, and his question that Daniel Pink asks a lot is, why do we not take matters of timing as seriously as matters of what or where? All of a sudden, it's still just about what classes they're taking.
Yeah.
What things are these students a part of, but not when. And it's discouraging that someone would think that somehow is not that important enough to act upon. That they're really, yes, it would be difficult. Changing that would be hard, but important things are going to be difficult, and that's worth it.
Yeah.
That's going to be something that's going to provide that much benefit.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is interesting because that's part of evolving.
Right?
We evolve in all these different areas, but why is there such a reluctancy to change the when of things? Is it because of the inconvenience of schedules from the teachers to the parents?
Sports get pushed later in the day. You may not have as much time for sporting activities, or people just think that now that they're not in school enough or long enough, then for some reason they're not learning as much. And it sounds like the studies are showing that that's the opposite is true. If the time is spent more productively, then they're actually going to be learning more.
Yeah. I wonder how serious this will be taken in the next handful of years to the next decade and see if it's putting into place in more schools, and then obviously the more it's going to be in, the more people will be open to seeing there is another way. But it's just again, we'll talk back to when you spoke about Henry Ford in a couple of videos ago about how they changed the workday, cut the hours in half, and doubled the pay because you realized they'd be more efficient this way. Huge difference. And that created the standardized 8-hour work week or 8-hour work day. But why can't are we doing that again? Are we figuring out, hey, maybe we're not going to do 4 hours a day instead, but what if 6 to 7 hours, or if we're doing the 8, give more breaks? And I talked about how the Finland, they have a break every 15 minutes. 15 minutes every hour, they have a break.
Wow.
And they're one of the highest educated country and test high on or score high on all the tests for the standardized testing. So we'll see.
I also think a part of it, it's very unfortunate. I was reading in another book, it talks about how a lot of times we lose the capacity to understand other people's situations after we've learned information that we're not ignorant on those things anymore, or we've essentially moved beyond some of those scenarios where when he talks about the chronobiologies of adults change to where getting up early in the morning isn't a problem for them. The curse of knowledge talks about it's harder for people to remember or to reconnect what it was like as a kid, to actually have it be very difficult to wake up.
Gotcha.
And I think there's this unfortunate disconnect that they just think that you have to, it's a part of it, everyone has to get up early, and they get up early, why can't you, type of thing.
Gotcha.
And so that's along a wide range of subjects that we lose touch and we can't fully understand what it was like again to be in those scenarios because we aren't anymore.
That's a great point.
I think that's not all of it. I think that's a part of one of the pieces that just people use is just that this is the way it is, or this is the way it was for me, or I have to do this anyways, why can't you?
Yeah, that's a great point. Because then going off of that, basically the teacher schedule is set up for a perfect adult's efficiency.
Yep.
Having breaks, starting early, and getting off basically at that midpoint or that trough, and then and then you're off for the rest of the day.
Yep.
Or you might go coach sports or have extracurriculars or be a part of the arts program. But yeah. Or speaking of, if it is the arts or sports, you're like using more of the insightful rather than necessarily the decision making.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't have to put on to children that they're not larks for a reason. They're growing and they can't help it. They actually need more sleep.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't force them to be into something because we know it would be more productive for us and not understand. Yeah. Maybe it's an ignorance on our part as adults, assuming that they should be better by waking up earlier. And if you wake up earlier, you're better.
Mm-hmm. And that's the time in your life when you need sleep the most. That's when kids are growing the most. That's when they need to be regenerating and replenishing themselves the most with sleep. And just going to bed earlier just doesn't make it easier.
Yeah.
Moving on from beginnings, we reach the middle.
Correct.
Daniel Pink has some good things to say about that.
Indeed he does. Midpoints, midlife crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get into it.
Very interesting. This is very culturally prevalent. We see and hear about this all the time. Mm-hmm. It's almost kind of this expectation, but also kind of a joke at the same time. Yeah. You know, it is kind of played upon, but I think it's become now a cultural part of how we view our lives.
Yeah.
And Daniel Pink looks at a study from 4 social scientists, and including a Nobel Prize winning economist.
Nice.
And they were taking a snapshot of people describing their moods throughout life. And this was from 340,000 people rating themselves 0 to 10. And what they found was there was this increase earlier on in life, and then through the midpoint in life, things did start to sag. Mm-hmm. And then they found that things re-increased and reinvigorated and got a lot higher as people actually got over. Mm-hmm. And what he's trying to bring to light is like that there is some effects that are happening in our life at this time that do seem to culturally actually kind of bring us down. But he talks about it being a slump, not this life-altering, life-changing ravine, trough, canyon that we're in.
Gotcha.
And so that people typically come out of this so much better and have so much more perspective coming from that area. It brings up a great question as to why. And there isn't really the best answer for it, but part of the reason is that people can come to a lot of realizations that maybe the expectations they had on life, maybe the things that they were thinking that were going to happen, a lot of things haven't come to fruition. And there kind of becomes a much more reflection point in their life. And typically because this is when people start to realize they don't have as much time left, and there are also much more major life events and changes that have changed to this point.
Okay.
And they're entering into one of the later phases of their lives.
Okay.
It typically offers a lot more reflection on people's lives. Midpoints in our life create a lot of reflection, and he goes into another study that talks about now how timing works with group activities. So there was a lot of studies done with groups who are in conference rooms, business groups, and how the timings of these affect them. And what they found is a lot of times the midpoint is where a lot of change happens. And they call this the uh-oh effect. With these groups, they continually kind of had discourse or were chaotic. And the thing that actually, on every scenario which brought them together in this study, was the timing of when they're completing a project. There kind of came all of a sudden this burst of concentration, this alignment, when people started to re-engage with the more productive capabilities of their group, and they found that was exactly at the halfway point of their deadlines. It's very interesting. Yeah. The bankers made their leap forward in designing a new account on the 17th day of a 34-day span. Hospital administrators took off in a new, more productive direction in week 6 of a 12-week assignment.
Wow.
And they found that this was with every team, and it was unexpected that they would do that. And that's when people typically, when the uh-oh effect kicks in, because they realize they don't have as much time as they thought that they did, and then it reinvigorates their sense of urgency. Okay. And then they start to take it much more seriously to move forward and progress.
Wow. And that's kind of why they, I guess, talk about the midpoints with sporting events too, of having is it still the uh-oh effect when it comes to sports for halftime or no?
It's not called that because this is based on deadlines that happen.
Because I'd read about how like you said too, but the team down by 1 point, where it's like that was talking about the midlife crisis, being down just a little bit to create new motivation to want to work hard and you see a challenge, opposed to being down too much and think it's like you can't do anything.
Yep.
Like they said in the midlife crisis, be reflective and think, what could I have done better or more, and then what still can I do, and be like, man, I'm a little bit behind, but I think I can do it. Mm-hmm. And it probably relates to a lot of people monetarily when it comes to retirement. So that it's not too late, that you still can hit the mark you need to. You just need to focus and work hard. But if you haven't started, I bet it'd be really intimidating. You're like, why even try? Mm-hmm. But I think it almost saying it's not for me. Probably I wouldn't like being behind. But I'm sure there are cases where people that are on track maybe stay on track and hit their mark, but the people that might be down a little bit might surpass that mark. And kind of talking about the aim high and miss, but you still hit higher than you would have if you aimed low and hit. Mm-hmm. All right, Trav, so we talked about beginnings, we've talked about midpoints, and now let's end with talking about endings.
This is how it all wraps up.
Yeah, what do you have for us?
This is where it ends. Endings are another important milestone kind of placeholder in our lives. We react a lot when things are wrapping up. Mm-hmm. And it affects a lot of times too how we are finishing because we feel a sense of urgency.
Yeah, so Daniel Pink talks about how endings produce some extra motivation, and specifically talks about energizing. And it says why we kick harder near the finish lines, or some finish lines. So specifically talks about the end of a decade. So 19, 29, 39, 49, etc. And they use an example in here about marathons, about how you are more likely to run a marathon when you're 29. It says people are most likely to run their first marathon at 29 than any other age. But then also people are more likely to run their first marathon at 49 than during the years before or after. And that one's a mixture of kind of the midlife crisis mixed with the end of a decade. But it creates the sense of urgency that we can take advantage of. You use it to your benefit, knowing that this is going to happen. It's going to create this sense of urgency that you'll think, I want to do this, that I want to run a marathon, I want to travel somewhere, I want to start a new diet, I want to work on investing. There's so many different things, and you can put something in that placeholder that excites you, that you've always wanted to do. And it's funny because it's just an age. Yeah. It's literally just a number, but we still feel that sense of urgency. So you can either use it to your advantage, and you don't want it to slip away. And then you turn 30, and then you're like, all right, new decade. It's just like relating back to the beginnings, a new year, your birthday, a new season. There's so many different things that we can use as opportunities to jumpstart a new season, I guess. And it's something you and I have talked about multiple times. We like living in seasons.
Yes.
It's nice having built-in resets. A marathon's a big deal, and arguably not healthy for you.
And to start one at 49 and have that be something
I know,
motivated to do.
The chance of people of per runners falls like by 60% once they hit 50 opposed to 49. So it's crazy how, and then 53 it's almost none. So it's just funny how a number can do that to you.
So I like what you said about using it to your advantage, and back to beginnings too. When something's ending, that's typically to when something else is beginning, and to use that as a new fresh starting point or a new motivation. Whereas, yes, the age is arbitrary. It's just the days continue.
Yeah.
We've placed a significant portion on that. But if that's going to be able to keep us creating momentum to move forward, I think that's important. And just to show how deadlines just help us with motivation, even with smaller things in life, a nonprofit organization who does small interest loans actually was having a problem with people starting applications and just not finishing them.
Interesting.
For something that could be as great as a small interest to no interest loan.
Yeah.
And it was a very lengthy online application, and their solution was to impose an ending. So they came out of that and they set a deadline, even though they didn't need one, but they wanted people to be finishing these. They wanted people to be a part of this. And so what that does, though, and what, that kind of the trade-off is that means that some people will fall outside of that deadline. That means some people will miss that deadline and won't be able to can't apply for the loan. But what they found was when it sent an applicant a reminder message with a deadline compared with a reminder message without a deadline, 24% more borrowers completed the application when the deadline was actually given to them. This is even true where they say that if there's a deadline for organ donors, they're more likely to show up. People with gift certificates are more likely to use it within 2 weeks than in 1 month.
Wow.
These deadlines, these points trigger a lot of our thoughts, trigger a lot of, motivation to finish the task, to complete what we've done. So Daniel Pink goes into the power of endings and how a lot of times it affects our perception. There was a questionnaire that was proposed to people where they gave a scenario of a CEO, and throughout his life, this CEO was very selfish, very self-centered, and lived his life that way until near the very end of his career, he turns benevolent, kind of does a benevolent. During the end of his career, he turns benevolent and starts to be generous, and then starts to actually use what he gained for good purposes. Then there's a scenario where there's a leader, there's a CEO who is benevolent, going up, giving his entire life. Then, at the last part of his life, he then turns selfish. He then starts to hoard, he then starts to only do things for himself. And in both scenarios, this was a 6-month period where these changes happen, and then he dies suddenly of a heart attack. And the researchers gave half of their participants the bad guy to good guy bio and half the good guy to bad guy bio, and asked both groups to evaluate this person's overall moral character. Across multiple versions of the study, people assessed his morality based largely on how he behaved at the end of his life.
Wow.
So through that really the lasting impression was what was finished, what was done, and that's what stuck in people's minds. It reminds me of recency bias, when it talks about that we'll be biased to like things that we've experienced more recently than things we have in the past, because that's what's so fresh and much more tangible in our minds.
Yeah.
And so our memories aren't that great to where even things like this, those endings, that last point becomes very sticky with how we assess these scenarios.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Rounding out when the scientific secrets of perfect timing, Daniel Pink talking about these starts, these middles, these ends. Where does that bring you to? How do you view these time-based events?
I think in knowing all of it, you see that there's, at least within the chapters we talked about today, is there's pros and there's cons. The bad part is that we can get too wrapped up in things that might not matter, and I think we get in our own way. And I think the good thing is we can use these as momentum and to energize us, and knowing that these might happen, take time and reflect and accept it for what it is, and then use that to our benefit. Use the end of a decade to launch Pattis into the new one. Use the new year to launch Pattis. And I've never been a huge person for New Year's resolutions, but I do enjoy using the new year as a reminder to reflect on what was last year, what can I do better, what do I want this year to look like, and then actually visualize that happening. And doing that in different scenarios and visualize your success. And then once you're there, is this what you want? And then you might be able to save yourself a lot of time and pain and energy if you realize maybe that's not what I want. Maybe that's not the career I want. Maybe that's not the degree I want to get. Maybe that's not the person you want to be with. I mean, it's all worth just taking some reflective time.
Yeah.
So, and then, but with timing, I think take advantage of the data. So, what about you? Do you have any closing thoughts on it?
Yeah. I like talking about using these to our advantage. And like you said, understanding the data and being willing to help that, pursue something better.
Yeah.
And with typically some of these, with these highs, with these great starts, there's going to be lows. But I think, and he talks about what become very important, is that these are slumps.
Yeah.
These are not the bottom. This is not the end all. And that these actually, I think those slumps and those trough points can help you gain appreciation for those new beginnings, for those fresh starts, for those things that are so much better.
Yeah.
And I think that life would be a lot more monotonous if we didn't have these focal points in our life, these things to get to, these things, if we didn't track our age in a year and didn't have these new start overs. He talks about if you don't start well, then try and start again. Try and start fresh.
Yeah.
And that these points, I think, can help us be momentum starters and to help keep propelling us forward when sometimes things are hard to get through. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us as we try and get a little bit smarter and gain a little bit of wisdom every day.
Let us know what you're reading, what you're listening to, and how you're gaining knowledge and you're gaining wisdom. We'd love to hear about it.
We want to use those things and share those things to hopefully enlighten our lives and help make the world a little bit better place.